When the HOA president showed up on my property, clipboard in hand and attitude dialed up to 10, I thought it was just another petty complaint. You know the kind, grass half an inch too tall, mailbox not HOA approved, that sort of nonsense. But this time, it wasn't about paint colors or fence height. No, this time they were furious that I'd started digging a small well in my own backyard. A personal private well and land I owned, free and clear. I was just trying to save on water bills and maybe live a little more independently. But apparently, my harmless project was unauthorized excavation and a community risk. Whatever that means, the kicker? They didn't just slap me with a fine, they called the cops. Actual sheriff's deputies rolled up on my property like I was running some illegal operation. I showed them my permits, explained it was a small, well, for personal use, but the HOA had already twisted the story. Said I was interfering with shared groundwater rights. The absurdity of it all? The same HOA board members who were accusing me of selfishness were deeply connected to a massive 1,500-head cattle farm just a few miles down the road. Farm that uses thousands of gallons of water daily, all sourced from our shared aquifer. That's when I found out something they didn't want me to know. The water line that kept their cattle hydrated ran directly through an easement on my land. And just like that, the tables turned. They tried to shut me down, but they forgot one thing: I still had control over the tap they desperately needed. What happened next flipped everything upside down. The only ones left high and dry. But before I tell you how I cut their water off for good, you'll need to hear exactly what pushed me over the edge. The whole thing started a few months back, when my water bills shot through the roof. I'm talking triple what I was paying the year before. I live on a decent chunk of land, not far from a few commercial farms, and I started getting suspicious. So I dug around a bit figuratively at first, and then literally. That's when I decided to install a small backyard well. Just enough to handle my household needs and stop depending on the increasingly expensive water from the main supply. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. I had the permits, I followed the local regulations, and I stayed within my property line. But apparently, none of that mattered to the HOA. They didn't care about the rising costs or my legal rights. What they cared about was control. Most of the board members were part of this tight-knit farming community that had quietly grown into a big money operation. And the biggest of them all was that cattle farm, a sprawling setup with hundreds of troughs, sprinklers running day and night, and water usage that made my little well look like a drop in the bucket. What nobody told me when I bought the property was that there was a buried water line running right through an old easement in my backyard, an easement granted decades ago when the land was still farmland. That pipe fed directly into the cattle farm's main water system. I hadn't even noticed it until I brought in a contractor to help with the well, and we hit a line we didn't expect at first. I was just curious. Then I got mad. The more I dug into the history, the more I realized they'd been using my land to supply their operation without paying a cent, and now they were trying to stop me from using a bit of water for myself. It didn't sit right. Something about it felt personal. And trust me, when I found out how deep their hold on the HOA really went, that's when everything changed after that surprise with the water line. I couldn't stop thinking about how long they'd been using my land without telling me. It wasn't just about the water anymore. It was about trust, or the lack of it. I started digging through county records, old plat maps, even spoke to a retired city planner who remembered when the easement was first drawn. Turns out, the agreement was only supposed to last 20 years and had technically expired over a decade ago. But nobody from the HOA ever brought that up. They just quietly kept the tap running, hoping no one would notice or challenge them. Meanwhile, the HOA kept ramping up the pressure. I got warning letters every other week. They claimed my well was a hazard, said it might destabilize the groundwater balance, and could hurt community interests. but there were no other wells nearby. The only ones pulling thousands of gallons daily were the farms, especially the cattle operation. I even caught one of their trucks parked suspiciously close to my back fence one night. When I approached, the driver took off. That's when I knew this wasn't just about code violations anymore. They were nervous. I started getting calls from neighbors, too. Some warned me to drop it, said it wasn't worth a fight. Others quietly supported me, admitting they'd always felt bullied by the HOA, but were too scared to speak out. One older couple down the road told me they'd been fined for installing solar panels without approval, even though the HOA's own rules allowed them. That's when I realized this wasn't an isolated incident. There was a pattern: HOA power grab masked as community regulation. Even my contractor, the guy helping with the well, said he was being pressured to walk away from the job. Apparently someone from the HOA threatened to report him for unlicensed excavation, which wasn't even true. It was like they had people everywhere pulling strings behind the scenes, using fear to get their way. But I wasn't planning to back down. I kept quiet about what I'd found with the easement. I wanted to be sure I had every detail lined up before I made a move. Meanwhile, they kept pushing, completely unaware that I now held the one thing they couldn't afford to lose. The pressure was building on both sides, and sooner or later, something was going to snap. Things got tense fast after I quietly confirmed that easement was expired. The HOA board wasn't just going to let me walk away with that knowledge. One afternoon, I came home to find a thick stack of official-looking letters slipped under my door. More warnings, more fines, and threats of legal action if I didn't stop digging and shut down the well immediately. Draining way more water daily. But no one wanted to call them out because they had deep connections and influence. People were scared. The next few days, I noticed trucks circling near my property more than usual. I caught glimpses of familiar faces from the cattle farm, checking things out like they were preparing for something. One night, my dog started barking like crazy, and when I looked outside, I saw someone crouched near the water meter by the old easement line. I confronted him, but he bolted before I could ask what he was doing. That only made me more certain. They were planning to cut me off or sabotage the well somehow. At the same time, the HOA organized a surprise meeting at the community hall, right when I was out working on the well. I wasn't invited, but I heard from neighbors that the board was trying to push a new rule to ban private wells, essentially forcing everyone to rely on their water supply. It was clear they wanted full control and wanted to make an example out of me. Then came the day my contractor called me, voice shaking. He'd been threatened with losing his license if he didn't stop the well project. He was ready to quit, but I told him we had to see it through. I could feel the walls closing in, the pressure mounting. I wasn't just fighting for water anymore. I was fighting for my right to use my own land and stand up against a system designed to keep people like me down. That's when I made the decision to turn the tables. I knew the water line running through my property was their weak spot. If I shut it off, even just temporarily, it could throw their whole operation into chaos. But I also knew it would bring a storm of backlash, legal threats, maybe even worse. The tension was unbearable, every day heavier than the last. I was standing at a crossroads, and whatever happened next would change everything for me. The HOA and that massive cattle farm. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more intense, the plot thickened in a way I never saw coming. A few days after I told my contractor to push ahead with the well, I received an unexpected visit from a lawyer claiming to represent the cattle farm. At first I thought it was just another scare tactic, more threats about trespassing or interfering with easements. But what this lawyer dropped on me blew everything wide open. Apparently, the farm had been secretly negotiating with the HOA to buy my entire property for redevelopment. They wanted to expand their operation, and my land was right in the middle of their plan. I was stunned. Not only had they been siphoning water through my backyard without permission, but now they were trying to push me out entirely. It felt like the whole HOA board was in on it, working behind closed doors while painting me as the problem. And it wasn't just about water anymore, it was about land, control, and power. The farm's expansion would mean more water usage, more environmental strain, and less freedom for everyone around. But here's the kicker. The lawyer hinted that if I didn't cooperate, he had evidence that could make my well illegal. After all, somehow they had dug up a clause buried in a forgotten county record that could spell serious trouble for me. Suddenly, the quiet battle over water was turning into a legal minefield. I realized I was caught in something way bigger than a simple backyard well dispute. At the same time, the community's whispers grew louder. Neighbors who once supported me started pulling away. Scared of losing their own homes if they crossed the farm and the HOA, the pressure wasn't just external anymore. It was closing in from every side. I was standing at the edge of a cliff with my water rights, my home, and my sanity all hanging in the balance. I knew the next move could change everything, but what I did next wasn't just about water anymore. It was about fighting back in a way no one expected. I knew I had to act fast before the farm and the HOA squeezed me out completely. So I made a choice that shocked even me. I shut off the water line running through my backyard. Just like that. The steady flow that kept their cattle farm alive stopped. I expected an immediate backlash, and I wasn't wrong. Within hours, angry calls started flooding my phone. The HOA board sent official warnings, threatening legal action and penalties. The farm's managers showed up demanding I turn the water back on, claiming their livestock would suffer. But I stayed firm. I wasn't about to let them bully me anymore. As days passed, the tension in the community reached a breaking point. The cattle were thirsty, and the farm's operations slowed to a crawl. Some neighbors, who had been silent before, began to speak up in my favor. They saw how unfair the whole situation had been, the way the HOA had covered for the farm. The threats against a simple homeowner trying to dig a well. A few local journalists even caught wind of the story, shining a light on the power imbalance and the farm's excessive water use. Then came the moment that changed everything. The farm's lawyer called me, ready to sue for trespassing and damages, but I had already prepared. I presented my research showing the easement had expired years ago, and the water line was essentially unauthorized. The HOA's own negligence was on full display, and the legal ground beneath their threats crumbled. Faced with mounting public pressure and a growing legal battle, the HOA reluctantly backed down. But just as I thought it was over, the final twist hit. I discovered a second hidden water line, one they'd installed secretly, bypassing my land altogether. The farm had anticipated my move and tried to outsmart me. That line was still flowing, keeping the cattle watered. It was a reminder that even when you think you've won, the fight isn't always finished. The battle for control, water, and fairness was far from over, and I knew I had to stay ready for whatever came next.